We have Linda Petrie from the Office of the Institutional Review Board to talk about the basics of the IRB. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here. Before I get started, I'd like to get a sense of who here might be involved in human subjects research or work with a human subject researcher at your campus. One. All right. So she will pay close attention. Everyone else will be in a haze. That's okay. I hope to. I also wanted to ask, who knows? Is there anyone who does not know what an IRB is? Because I did not kind of put that in my presentation. I could. Okay. So I'll talk about that to start, so that we're all on the same page. So I want to start by introducing our staff. We are an office that supports the Institutional Review Board. We are fully staffed for the first time in many years. And we have very qualified people in our office. And I'm going to talk more about their role in the IRB review process as we go through the presentation. Our contact information is there. We pride ourselves on outreach and on consults, understanding that you are remote campuses. We understand that you're not able to visit us in person. But I'm going to reinforce throughout the presentation that if you ever have a question, that you can contact us by email, by phone. We're very responsive, so we'll be sure and reach out back to you within 24 hours if we get an email or a phone message from you. So before I start, for those of you who do not know what an IRB is, it is an institutional review board. It is a committee that's mandated by the federal government to oversee, review, and approve or disapprove human research. It was basically set up when there was directly for federally funded projects, but most institutions apply it to all of their human research activities regardless of funding. There are certain regulatory requirements about board membership, and basically you have to have a minimum of 5 members on the committee, and they have to be a diversified group. We have to have at least one scientific member, at least one non-scientific member, at least one non-affiliated member. So that would be someone who's not affiliated or their spouse is not affiliated with UNM, as well as specialized specialties on the committee in order to review the different types of research that we see. So currently our board here at UNM, we have one board. It has 16 members. We have 4 child representatives because we have a lot of research involving children. We have 2 prisoner representatives, as we do have research that involves prisoners. We have 4 non-scientifics, 4 non-affiliated, so we have a lot more than we need, but they have to be present at the meeting in order to conduct a meeting, so we want to make sure that we have plenty of them. Plus, they represent the community's viewpoint, which I think is really important in the discussions on the IRB. We currently have representations from 8 different UNM departments, and we're actually recruiting right now 2 graduate or professional students to serve 1-year terms on the board. We're trying to get kind of a younger demographic on our committee, and we thought it'd be a really good experience for some of our graduate students to serve on the ethics board to get an inside look at what that is like. So we do have a PI eligibility policy here on the campus, and this applies to the branch campuses as well. In order to function as a principal investigator on a study, you have to be UNM faculty, that is 0.25 or greater, or a UNM staff member with a letter of academic title. If that is your situation, you would submit that letter of academic title with your submission so that we could verify that. With every great policy, there are exceptions. So there is exceptions for employees who are hired where their primary function is to do research, such as a research scientist, or faculty that's less than 0.25. In those instances, we do have a form that would need to be completed and signed at a departmental level to make sure that the department supports that research and that they will take full responsibility from a compliance standpoint for the conduct of research. So we have what's called a departmental review that's required before a study comes in to be reviewed by the IRB. The purpose of this is to have someone in the department look at the study. It's usually done by the chair of the department, but sometimes they designate someone else. The purpose is twofold. It's really to ensure that the department is supportive of the research. I remind you that we do see a lot of student research here, so it's a big part of our portfolio is the graduate students doing research, so we want to make sure that the department is aware of the research being done and that they're supportive of it. and also to allow for the scientific review by experts in that area. We do not claim to have perfect representation on the IRB. We do not have experts in every single scientific field that's represented in our research portfolio here at UNM. So we do look to the department to look closely at the research design, resources that are being used, whether there's adequate literature review done in their best judgment, and we ask them to sign off and send that in to us when you do a submission to the IRB. So this is a very crowded slide. The reason I add this to every single presentation I give is because having your IRB approval lapse is a big deal. And when I came into the office in May, we had about 280 lapse studies at UNM. And what happens with a lapse is if a study undergoes full committee or expedited review, it's given a 1-year approval period. And at the time of continuing review, you must resubmit to the IRB to have that approval reinitiated for another year. That wasn't happening on a regular basis here at UNM. I'll admit a lot of it was student research, so the students do their research usually in less than a year's time, and then they graduate, and they just failed to close it out with our office. So we did have to put a pretty stringent policy in place to make sure that we're not at risk of having that type of noncompliance, because that's how the government views it, as noncompliance if you're conducting research outside of IRB approval. Now, we didn't have evidence that research was being conducted. All we knew that they never told us what was happening beyond that 1-year mark. So what we did is we implemented a policy within our office so that we immediately notify the PI of record and the student investigator, if there is one, the day after expiration. There are also notices that go out in advance, of course, automated by our database. And we tell them basically at that point you can't be conducting any type of human research activities. And that includes working with identifiable research data. So they are made aware of that, and they're asked to submit paperwork within 10 days. We give kind of a 10-day grace period. If they do not submit something to us within that time, the study goes for a noncompliance review by our committee, and then they receive a noncompliance letter, and the study is administratively closed. At that point, we have an obligation, if it's a federally funded study, to report it to the funder, and we're working with contracts and grants to figure out how that's going to be done. And you have 6 months basically to reactivate that study, but you should not be doing any type of research when you don't have active IRB approval. If the study's done, you can close it out with us, and that meets the needs of the regulatory requirements. The main hammer we're using here is that we won't process anything more from that PI until they take care of that noncompliance issue. So that seems to be changing behavior. That's had one this week, and we immediately got the closure in. So I'm also sending monthly reports to department chairs and center directors for any study that goes beyond that 10-day deadline, just to make them aware and perhaps get their help in getting the appropriate paperwork submitted. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what has to come to the IRB. Basically, we oversee human subject research. There is a federal definition of human subject, and that is a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction, and we consider that to be primary data collection, or they're working with previously collected identifiable data. Okay, in order for the secondary data to include human subjects, it has to be identifiable. If it's completely anonymized data, it's not considered human subject. Okay, so that's one piece of the definition. The other piece is research, and that definition is this: a systematic investigation designed to develop or to contribute to generalizable knowledge. And these are some examples that the regs give. These seem a little more straightforward than they actually are. We have a lot of debates about what is human subject research, and we have a lot of people contact us for help with these definitions. So it's not always black and white. Sometimes we have to talk it through, especially with regards to research. If they're doing quality assurance activities, that may fall in that area where do we or do we not. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But basically, if your activity meets this definition, it has to come through the IRB. So what are some examples, common examples? I tried to think of things that might be happening at your institutions. Focus groups or interviews. That would be primary data collection through an interaction with an individual, okay? surveys or questionnaires, sometimes even institutional surveys to collect information that are done with staff meet the definition of research, sometimes they don't. So if you're involved in an activity like that, it's worth a call to our office to figure out if it's something that needs to come through the IRB. I mentioned identifiable private data, so this is a big one. We don't work so much on these campuses with medical data, which is a big deal on the North Campus, but we do work with educational records a lot. So those may be considered private identifiable information. So if you're doing research with student records, you might need to be coming through the IRB. And finally, quality assessment, quality improvement. This is one of those that may or may not, again. Sometimes people just want to have IRB approval to be safe. They're just very cautious, and that's fine. We're welcome, you're welcome to submit any kind of project that you want. If we do not feel that it meets the definition of human subject research, we will provide you a letter stating that it doesn't require IRB oversight, and then you can be on your way. Okay, so there's different levels of IRB review. For studies that are more than minimal risk, they have to be reviewed by a full committee. So we have to convene the entire committee. We meet once a month. The regulations state that the majority of the members have to be at the meeting. And also we have to have our non-scientific person present. So we can't even hold the meeting if those aren't met. We review the regulations under 111, which I'm going to talk about in just a little bit so you understand kind of what we're looking at. It's not only studies that are more than minimal risk, but also studies that do not fit expedited review categories that are defined by the government. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that today because I don't want your eyes to glaze over. But the expedited review criteria includes things like non-invasive collection of biospecimens, so like cheek swabs, MRIs, things like that, blood draws are all considered minimal risk procedures per the federal government. So there's a posted list of those things. The next level of review is expedited review, which sounds faster, and sometimes it may be, but that's not what the word expedited means. Basically, it means that it's a minimal risk study. It falls into one of the categories of expeditable research, and it's reviewed by one member of the committee instead of the entire committee. So the process isn't necessarily faster, but there's only one set of eyes looking at it instead of an entire committee. And then exempt review is, I'm going to talk a little more about exemptions. If studies meet, human research studies meet exemption criteria, that determination has to be made by the IRB here at UNM, and basically means that the regs don't apply. You're kind of one and done with the IRB. So we grant you an exemption, and then you don't have to undergo continuing review with our office. So people hear the word exempt, which is not a good choice for any kind of regulation because they think that means that they're exempt from even dealing with the IRB, but that's not the case. The way the regs are written is a little confusing because it says anyone but the investigator can make that determination. But obviously, institutions want to put a little more oversight in place. So most institutions designate the IRB to be the one to make an exemption because we're the ones most familiar with the regulations. But some organizations may have and actually have another group doing those type of reviews. Okay, so it doesn't have to be the IRB. So here you want to file with us, and I want to give you some examples of exempt research. I'm not going to go through all the categories because it's very regulatory based. But some of the most common categories of exempt research are educational testing. So educational research where they're comparing the effectiveness of two different curriculum. They're looking at adding a new procedure to their teaching, and they want to do pre and post testing on the students to see if it worked well. That kind of activity would fall under exemption category 1. Now that means it is human subject research, but it meets an exemption category, so you wouldn't have to come back for continuing review with the IRB. Another popular category is interviews and surveys. So the caveat with this one, however, is the regs specify that if you're doing interviews or surveys, and if you want it to meet exemption criteria, it can't be on a sensitive topic. So it can't be any kind of information that would put someone at risk of employability, reputation, legal issues. So if it's kind of sensitive topics that you're collecting, it wouldn't fall under exemption. But if it's a benign survey, We had one where they were doing interviews with farmers and they were asking about quinoa crops and things like that. Something like that very easily falls under an exemption. Category 4 is probably the third most common here, and that's working with de-identified data. So that would be working with secondary data. The way the regs are written, you can actually obtain it identifiable, but when you record it for your research, it has to be completely identified. So sometimes that can be a little confusing, and we can help you if you're trying to understand what that means. But the other 3 categories aren't very common here, at least on this campus. 3 is working with public officials. It specifically calls out elected officials. Category 5 is working with public benefit programs and doing evaluations of those. And Category 6 is for food evaluation, quality testing, which we don't participate in here at UNM. So I wanted to show you our website. We've recently revamped it. If you smell like there might be human subject research in the air, I want you to refer people here. It's a good resource to try and navigate whether IRB review is required. We have recent announcements. We have a researcher toolkit, so that has all of the submission materials that they need, instructions on how to submit to the IRB. Our library is where you'll find all of our forms and our templates, and I'm going to talk more about those in a moment. We also have a policy and guidelines, guidances link, and a calendar of all the different events we hold, the workshops we hold. Again, I know you're remote. If for some reason you had a gathering of human researchers at your campus and you would like one of us to come out to visit with you and give a presentation, we would be very happy to do that. We just kind of need to plan it ahead. But that is something me and my staff talked about yesterday, and we'd be happy to come out if it was warranted. So forms and templates, we've really been working hard on these. We're trying to simplify them. When our office started, we came over from North Campus, so we inherited a lot of biomedical templates, and they were very complicated and long, and the social behavioral scientists here on main campus didn't appreciate that too much. So we did spend a lot of time trying to simplify those. So we have simplified our protocol template. We've simplified our consent form templates to be no more than 2 pages now. So those are all on the website. I recommend that if you're going to be starting a submission that you use our newest templates that are posted, because they're going to be the best fit for you at this point. This is a screenshot of our policy and guidance on the website. I have basically been writing policy since I started in May, so they're all going up as I get them done. These are very important. If you are doing human research, you have to follow these policies. So we've tried to identify who they're relevant to, so that if you're a researcher, you don't necessarily want to know how we internally process submissions. That may not be of interest to you, or you may not want to know how we do evaluations of IRB members, but you're definitely going to want to know what your responsibilities are with regards to research non-compliance, what initial expedited review requirements are, those kind of things. So I definitely recommend if you're working with a researcher, you refer them to this and make sure they're knowledgeable. The expectation is that they've read and understood these. I just wanted to mention FERPA. FERPA is relatively new to me because I did come from North Campus, so I was more of a HIPAA girl. But I'm learning about FERPA now. It's a big deal on this side of campus. We have a lot of researchers in the College of Education and such that are trying to access student records for different reasons for research. So we recently issued a guidance, and we put it on our website about FERPA and what the requirements are for researchers to access those records. And they're pretty straightforward. You either have to get written permission from the student, or there's certain exceptions that can be gotten, but those are detailed in the guidance. So just keep that in mind if you know of a researcher working with educational records. So submitting to our office, fortunately or unfortunately, we have a different database than Cayuse. So it is a fairly straightforward database, but it is a new database. It is something different. It's online. We do online submission. It's called IRB Net. We have links to that on our website. You would set up an account and submit all your documentation through us, so you don't have to come to campus to bring us anything. Everything's done through that. We have a IRB submission checklist. We always refer people to this first because it is very detailed on what needs to be submitted for a new study, what needs to be submitted for continuing review. If the study changes during the course of the activity, we need to know about that. And so you would need to submit an amendment to your protocol and get that approved if you change recruitment materials, things like that. So that's a really important document to reference if you're putting together a submission to us. So required trainings, we do require that all human subject researchers have what we refer to as CITI training. It's a program developed out of the University of Miami. It's online. It's really becoming popular, so most institutions are using CITI now. We have our own requirements there, so you would want to affiliate as a main campus researcher. We just changed the requirement from every 2 years to every 3 years, so that's a nice break for everybody. The first time you take this training, it does take a little bit of time, a couple of hours. The refresher course in 3 years is quite short, however, but just be aware if you have someone who's going to be submitting to us, please make them aware that the training is required. We won't move the submission through unless their training is done, and it does take a little bit of investment of time up front. We also require that everyone fill out a financial conflict of interest form. Faculty are required to do that every year standard, but students aren't always aware that they need to do that. So there is a link on our website to the COI website where they can do an online disclosure, and it's just like 4 questions that they have to answer, but we do verify that as well. Project team members on an IRB are, for the purpose of the IRB, are those individuals who either are interacting with human subjects or are accessing identifiable research data. If they're not doing either of those, we don't really need to know about them, okay? All right, the protocol, very, very, very important document. I mentioned we had a template for this. I'm not gonna go through all of these, but these are the kind of questions that you'd wanna think about. It's a very different type of document than what you're writing for your grant application, because you have to think about things that necessarily NIH or NSF doesn't need to know, especially with regards to recruitment process, how you identify individuals, what you're gonna say to them, what the consenting process is gonna look like, et cetera. So if you're gonna spend your time on a document, this is the one to do it on. The consent form, it's both a process and there's documentation associated with it. So the consent form is very important. Sometimes documentation is waived, in many cases for minimal risk research. So you're not necessarily going to get a signed consent form, but you're always going to have an interface with that person, and you're going to have a discussion either online or in person about what is involved with the research and to make sure that they want to participate. We also need to see all of your study instruments. This includes any surveys or questionnaires you might be administering, interview scripts. You may not have all your interview questions planned out, and that's fine. Focus groups especially, sometimes you're just working with themes. That's fine. We just kind of want to get a sense of what you're going to be saying to the individuals. Recruitment materials, if you're posting flyers, if you're sending an email to students to recruit them, we want to see what that looks like and make sure that there's no undue influence or coercion going on in the recruitment process. So this is kind of a visual demonstration of the IRB review process. Over on the left is kind of what the researchers are working on prior to submission. That is when we usually get the phone calls, the consults. We want to help you. Our job is to help you prepare the best submission you can, because it will literally take weeks off of the review if you do a good job coming in the door. And then in the pending review, that's when it's with my staff. My staff always does a thorough pre-review of anything that comes through the door. Again, we're trying to get it in great shape for the reviewers, so once it goes to the IRB, there won't be a lot of back and forth with the investigator, because we understand that there's timeliness needed to get your research up and running. There may be modifications requested. Again, the sooner you get those back to us, the sooner we're going to be able to get it back out to the reviewers, okay? So responsibilities as an investigator, we need human subject researchers to know about the Belmont report, hopefully to have read the Belmont report, and understand the ethical principles of human subject protections. Keep your training up, follow the IRB's determinations, and if they ask you to modify your protocol in a certain way, you'd be expected to follow that modified protocol. Use only approved documents. So if you're going to get signed written consent, we're going to give you a stamped consent form, and we'd want you to use that consent form. That way we can validate that it was one that we actually looked at. You want to retain your records de-identified. When you de-identify your data, you can close it with the IRB. UNM has a records retention for research of 5 years, so you'd want to keep those stored for 5 years. If you're working with a sponsor, they may have other requirements, so you want to make sure that you defer to the longest retention requirement. And if you're mentoring students, again, the students aren't PIs on the project, the faculty are the PI, so it's really important that you're a good mentor and that you teach your student to do all of these things because they are also an investigator and are held responsible for the conduct of the research. So outreach and training, again, we spend a lot of time, especially this time of year as everyone's trying to get their submissions into the IRB. In consults, one-on-one consults, we have a link on our website to set one of those up. It's a request a consult. You can request an email consult, a phone consult, so please use that. We get back to you within 24 hours. We also have, wrong way. We also have workshops I mentioned. We'd be willing to come out to your campus if you have a group of people who you think would benefit from some IRB training. But communications are really important, especially if you're working with funded research with a short timeline to get IRB approval. We can hopefully accommodate that, but we need to be aware of it to be able to help you out. Otherwise, we really deal with submissions on a first come, first serve basis. But we understand, especially NSF is imposing some really short timelines for IRB approval, literally like 3 weeks. So if you're in that situation, please contact me and let me know, and we'll do our best to try and accommodate you. Okay, is there any questions? No? Okay, I did leave you a couple of materials that you might want to take back, just if you think people are doing. We created these decision trees. They're on the back table to help you determine whether IRB needs to be involved in your project. So it really kind of gives examples and helps you think through that. We also have more of a text-based document that gives examples of different kind of projects, like class projects, things like that, and whether they require IRB review. So these are also available on our website, but if you want to take some hard copies, I made plenty in the back for you to take back to your campus.